Trade reports are really starting to pick up as a brand new report has dropped revealing a surprising Leafs trade target that has Leafs fans fired up. We're going to break that down, discuss what it means going forward, as well as discuss a report from Elliot Freeman as it pertains to this player. Stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we get into it, folks, if you're part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. Your guys' support has been absolutely fantastic, so thank you for that. As we're on the road to 15,000 subscribers with Darius, a lot of updates are coming out. Trade talks are really starting to pick up. We're getting new reports by the minute, by the hour. And of course, we've had videos earlier today and over the past few days about Mikko Rantanen and players like that. But a new target has emerged now surrounding the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this is going to be a common theme as we are now a bit over a week away from the trade deadline. Teams now are starting to figure out who they want to trade, whether they're going to be buyers or sellers. The fringe teams are starting to have some clarity here. And the player we're going to be talking about today is Seth Jones. You can see this here on February 19th. Seth Jones says he's talking with the Blackhawks about the possibility of a trade. I would like to give myself a chance to win in my career. Now, this was obviously on February 19th, and since then, he's kind of doubled down on that. He's continued to say that they're looking for a trade. We've heard new reports, which we'll dive into a little bit from over the past couple of days, basically highlighting the fact that Seth Jones is going to be available. Brad Treliving has been incredibly interested in Seth Jones' entire career, has consistently made large-scale trades to bring in defenders. Jones alongside Pietrangelo are very real Leafs targets, especially with a rising cap. And this is very interesting, and we're starting to hear now, again, earlier on in the month, we were hearing some players that were available, and Dylan Cousins, things like that. Now we're really starting to hear who's actually available here. And this one is extremely, extremely interesting. Seth Jones, the cap hit is absurd. He's under contract for 5 more years, but he's only 30 years old, and he is definitely going to be available according to these new reports.
So the contract, as you can see on screen right now, is abysmal, right? Like, I mean, to get him to the Toronto Maple Leafs, there would have to be a lot of work done. But to focus on the Chicago Blackhawks side of things for a second, this is a player that, has come out a couple days ago, even last night, and said, I don't believe in the direction of this team. This team has no direction. We haven't improved at all since the start of the year, which you would hope with Connor Bedard and where the team has kind of hoped to go, that they would be taking steps in the right direction, but they're not doing that. So he's pretty much done with the team. He's made some pretty shocking comments over the last couple of days that he wants out. He wants out like ASAP too. Like he wants to be traded as soon as possible. And I just don't know if the Blackhawks are going to be able to do that because they're going to have to retain salary no matter where he goes because that contract, again, is abysmal. Now, if you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, there is no world they can even take on half of his contract. So I think this is very unlikely this year. But looking into the future, this is a guy that obviously Brad Treliving has had some interest in. The Leafs could have interest in, he's not that old, right? I think he's only about to, enter his 30s. So this is another guy that would be younger than a Chris Tanev. Like if you start looking towards it a couple of years from now, I could see this being a possibility, maybe next year, 2 years from now, something like that. I could see it being a possibility. I'm not saying it's a good idea. Certainly not a good idea right now. And with this cap hit, it's going to be incredibly hard to move. You would need 2 teams to retain salary on him. So, and I don't think those teams are going to want to do that for the duration of his contract. So interesting report for sure, but I don't know if it makes sense for the Leafs right now.
Yeah, the Leafs could give up some other big assets and somehow, they could make it work. Diving into his stats a little bit, I believe he just turned 30. Yeah, so just turned 30s, like you mentioned, and he's in his early 30s, which, the earliest of 30s. He's 30 years old. He has 27 points in 41 games here, and it's very intriguing because he is a defenseman that would definitely elevate the floor of this team and also elevate the ceiling of this team as well, which is something that the Leafs, Chris Tanev is looking like he's going to be okay, so that's interesting, but he's putting up an okay season. He's playing 24 minutes a game, and keep in mind, again, points don't really matter as much for defensemen, but you're also playing on such a bad team in Chicago that even looking at the defense analytics are a little bit rough as well. However, he's still, for a guy who put up 27 points with the team that he's surrounded by, even if, again, points don't really matter as much for a defenseman, but adding a nice offensive, not even that he's necessarily fully an offensive defenseman, it helps a little bit.
I'm not sure if this guy is worth his contract at over $9 million, but like you mentioned, a couple things there. Like you mentioned, he has 27 points in 41 games so far this season. He's playing on a terrible team, right? Like I think this guy's a lot better than people give him credit for. I think he's actually a pretty good player. If you were to put this guy in a second pairing on a really good contender, like he would make a team like that much better. Like if you put this guy on the second pairing of the Toronto Maple Leafs, forget the cap, all of that. Like they would have a really good situation going with a guy like this on their second pairing. He averages almost half a game every night with the Chicago Blackhawks, which is crazy time on ice. Like he plays a lot of minutes. So if you were to dial that back a little bit and put him in a different role, I think he could be a really effective player on any contending team. I just don't know if it makes sense right now because of the contract they gave him. So clearly he wants out. Maybe they can get creative if they want to, but Chicago retaining like 50% of his salary for the next 4 or 5 years, whatever it is with this contract, that is that is insane for that franchise to have to do. So I'm not sure if he gets moved, soon, but I could see this coming to a head probably next season or maybe in the offseason, something like that. But at least for the Toronto Maple Leafs, it would be an interesting idea. Just it wouldn't work at that cap hit, not even close.
Yeah, they'd have to either have multiple teams retaining, which is probably would be the only avenue. That being said, if for some reason or whatever reason Chicago's super high on some of the prospects the Leafs have or the picks that the Leafs have,
Right.
maybe they could, if they really want to get it done, they can make it happen. If that's something that both sides want, you can see this here. We're the exact same team now as we were game one. It's pretty evident out there. We haven't made any strides to be a better, more simple hockey team, and it shows. He wants to leave. He wants to get out of Chicago, which makes sense. Again, he's under contract for 5 more years. He was the one who signed the deal. Seth Jones' comments are too little, too late for the Blackhawks and their fans. I've been here the last 4 years through probably the darkest times the Blackhawks have seen for a while. I think things are moving up. They're moving forward, but I think my timeline might be different than Kyle Davidson. And the Blackhawks, there's nothing against anybody. I'm not holding it against anybody and what they decided to do here. Sometimes it's not in everyone's plan. So it seems like he is as good as gone. And Pierre LeBrun also shed some insight here. He thinks that it's going to be hard to move him if Chicago isn't retaining. So Kyle Davidson and Jones' agent have been working on this for 3 weeks. Mentioned Dallas, Columbus as teams that may fit, but questions how the contract fits with Dallas. We're hearing rumblings again of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Darius, it seems like he is just not really, he's fed up with the team as well as just his timeline. And I don't think it's anything against the team necessarily. It just doesn't fit what he wants, which is to win now. And unfortunately for him, he did sign that contract. So he's under contract for the next 5 years.
Well, this is Connor Bedard's second season, right? I think that he thought, and probably the organization thought, that they were going to be further along in their rebuild, and they're not. They're probably in the same spot. Like you said, they're like exactly in the same spot. It's not encouraging whatsoever. There's no signs of them taking steps forward right now with some of the prospects and some of the things they have in play there. They have help on the way, and it should improve at some point. But like we just mentioned, he's 30 years old. I don't know if that matches his timeline. Like, are they going to be ready to actually compete when he's 35? Like, I'm sure he wants to try and go win a Stanley Cup right now. Obviously before, but I'm sure he wants to do that right now. And yes, he signed that contract, but I mean, I thought that it probably made sense at the time that he signed it because you thought that this team might be contending for a playoff spot at this point. So it's going to be very interesting. He wants out. Like everything that's been said the last week, he absolutely wants out. It's going to be interesting to keep tabs on that heading into the offseason because, again, I think at this year's deadline, that's going to be incredibly hard for any contender to try and make that work. And the Blackhawks, you're retaining salary, and retaining salary for that long is going to be a problem, right? Like no team wants to do that. It's going to hold you back a bit. So going to be very interesting to see what happens. I think he would look great on the Leafs if he was making half of that, right? Or maybe a little bit less than that. He would look fantastic, but that's in a perfect world. So we'll see what happens. Brad Treliving's also had, interest in him. And as we move towards next season, a lot could change. We don't know what's going to happen with Mitch Marner. Maybe they go out and trade for Mikko Rantanen. Maybe they don't. Maybe they have a ton of money to use next summer. All of a sudden, maybe they want to spend it on a guy like this. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but Brad Treliving might go, we need some more defense help maybe, and a guy like this could help on the second pairing.
With the rising cap as well, I mean, maybe they make the trade for him, somehow make things work there with the salary because they know Mitch Marner is going to leave and they can stomach some of the hits, even though this year you need, of course, retained salary in order to make it work. It'd be interesting to see what happens. One quick note before I wrap up from Elliot Freeman on Seth Jones. He's not provided a list of teams he would want to go to, and exploring a trade is a Jones-driven move. Blackhawks are fine with keeping Jones around if a deal isn't made, and provides thoughts on Columbus, Dallas, and Florida. So it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to keep you up to date with all the latest news, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let me know down below, and let us know down below, would you want Seth Jones on the Leafs?